Good morning, everybody. What a great morning, I think, to celebrate. And I started the Childhood Cancer Caucus 10 years ago, and there wasn't a whole lot of good news back then, 10 years ago. But I think today we have a lot of good stories to tell, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. I want to thank Mike Kelly for being here, sort of my partner on the Hill. Thank God he could remember the Irish toast last night. Because I'm Irish, but sometimes my memory fades on that. Jackie Spear, who's my co-chair, could not be here. She has a broke her leg or surgery. G.K. Butterfield's always been great. Danielle Leach, where was she? Baldrick. Kevin, who always wears the best sport coats. I mean, he looks great. And you look good in the White House, which that was kind of an odd couple seeing you and President Trump together, I must say, if you know what I mean. And Vicki Bunger, Coalition Against Childhood Cancer. Nci Budget, my dear friend, who really was a brainchild behind so many of the bills that we've been able to pass in the Congress. Not easy to pass a bill these days. I passed 110 bills out of my committee on Homeland Security. You know how many of those we passed in the Senate? 5. I think that demonstrates how successful you have been, we have been, in getting things done for our kids, for the children of America, to protect them. Gavin, he's going to be speaking later today. He's the big guy. He's right in front of me. We're very honored to have the NCI director here, Ned Sharpless, who's going to talk about what NCI is doing within NIH. Some pretty exciting stuff going on we were talking about, and I look forward to hearing from you as well. And I want to thank all the children participating in the Youth Lobby Day, all the kids up here on the Hill. I plan to be at the Cure Fest rally tomorrow night. I hope you'll join us. I think they told me I'm getting some golden boxing gloves, and then we're going to march down the mall. As part of this movement, this cause, and it is. It's a movement that everyone in this room has started. I know most of you very well have started over the years. I mean, Nancy just handed this to me. This is, since we started the Childhood Cancer Summit, this is a compendium of bills and legislation that we passed. It is a cause. I'm proud of the work that we've done. And I'm proud that we passed several bills. I want to talk about those real briefly. We couldn't have done it if we didn't have little advocates, survivors, in the room like Brianna, with the Creating Hope Act, going down to, Nancy Pelosi on the House floor and getting Nancy Pelosi to sign up. Truly bipartisan work. Brianna's at Hollen now. She's a sophomore college. I mean, she was a kid, and now she's that's how long we've been.
I first met her when she was 9.
And then we, Hope on Wheels, raising $145 million for the cause. Just amazing stuff. We had the RACE Act that we passed to look at adult childhood cancer medications. How can we apply those to children? And then just recently, thanks to Thomas Rice and the work of all the advocates, the STAR Act, Survivorship, Treatment, Access, and Research. Most comprehensive bill ever passed by the Congress. Could have done it without you. I can't tell you how important it is. It's kind of like, before 9/11, the FBI wouldn't share with the CIA, and the CIA wouldn't share with the state and locals, and all that stuff. That was my world. when I was a federal prosecutor in Joint Terrorism Task Force, very similar to that, is that all this information is so siloed, and you have HIPAA restrictions, and now we'll be able to share all this data, biospecimen data, to then get to real cures. The Cures Act was huge. NIH has $39 billion in funding. They're going to get a $2 billion increase in funding thanks to the Congress. Serious. Saying, Hannah, thank you for being here. She's like, it's like Brianna, Hannah, now we get Sadie. And I'll get to Sadie in a little bit. But when the STAR Act was passed, I texted Ivanka. I said, look, this is just one of those moments. You got to have a White House signing ceremony, and we did. And she made it happen. And I'll never forget. That's a picture of Sadie sitting right next to the president. And usually the president will give the pen to the author of the bill, but I think rightfully so, he gave it to Sadie, my little best childhood advocate. Sadie, who's been such a great spokesperson for the cause, has become a bit of a face for the cause. We've been on Will Blitzer, we've been on Fox News talking about the cause, and all this helps in terms of public awareness, outreach, getting legislation passed through the Congress. And why is this all so important? Because we're making a difference. I couldn't have told you that 10 years ago. When we started this 10 years ago, I couldn't say that we were making a difference. We weren't. The #1 killer of our children, and Congress was not doing anything. These little children didn't have advocates. They didn't have high-paid lobbyists to come on the Hill and lobby. But we got better lobbyists. We got survivors. We got kids that have cancer. And unfortunately, some don't make it. But they come to the Hill and they talk to members of Congress, and that is more persuasive, I would argue, than any high-paid lobbyist in this city. And I'm so proud of the work that y'all have done working together, because it is going to make a difference in the lives of our kids long term. Creating Hope Act, that was, again, the brainchild of Nci Budget. What was the problem? Well, the drug companies didn't have any market incentive to produce drugs for rare orphan diseases. They couldn't make money off it. So we didn't see any discoveries. So what do? We changed the way the FDA worked. We created a priority review voucher system where they would have a voucher if they created a childhood cancer drug for another drug they were creating that would go to the front of the line. It's estimated these vouchers are worth about $300 million. A direct economic incentive to create cures for cancer for children. And it worked. It was a total, right, Nancy? This was a complete experiment. We had no idea if this was going to work. Somehow we got it passed into law, signed by the President Obama at that time. We didn't know if it was going to work, but it did. And the next thing we knew, I saw a little Rex Ryan at Dell Children's Hospital, a little 3-year-old kid with blonde hair, blue eyes, neuroblastoma. Congressman, thank you. We have a drug now, thanks to the bill you passed, that saved my son's life. That is extraordinary. In the Congress, first of all, to pass anything in the Congress these days is extraordinary. But to pass a bill that you can see that kind of result, I mean, it really is probably the most, I mean, I'd save a lot of lives in Homeland Security from the terrorists, but saving children's lives from the #1 killer is the most profound thing I've done in the Congress. And I couldn't have done it without people like Nancy, with the great ideas and all the advocates out there. But to look at Rex Ryan, who's alive because we passed a bill, and now all these other kids with neuroblastoma. And then just recently, Novartis came out with something called CAR-T, What's CAR T? It's immunotherapy. It's personalized medicine. It takes white blood cells, re-engineers your immune system, puts it back in your body to attack your own cancer cells. That is the future of cancer treatment. That's where we're headed. We're being visionary here because we have to be. Because you know what we use today? What they used on Hannah and Brianna and Sadie, something called chemotherapy. And where did that come from? Well, if you study the history, and I'm a historian by nature, it came as a derivative of a World War I toxic gas called mustard gas. That's chemo. That's what we currently use to kill the cancer in the body before it can kill you. How barbaric. Historians 100 years from now are going to look back and think, my God, they radiated them, they used this chemical agent that was used, in World War I. It's all changing. And the Creating Hope Act now has led to this CAR T discovery that will personalize medicine and change the way we treat cancer forever. That's how big this is. Now, I don't want to understate that. This is a huge deal moving forward. For our children, not just our children, but for the human, for all humans across the world. The RACE Act, why can't we take adult drugs and try to apply them to children? If there's a beneficial way to do it, we pass that. And all these bills, they told us, oh, you can't get it done. There's no way. Hey, you're not on the right committee. You're not on Energy and Commerce. We'll call we like it, Chairman Homeland, but you don't know anything about medicine. I mean, can't get it done. We did. And I got it done. And Mike got it done because we took people like Brianna and Hannah and Sadie on the floor, because they can say no to us, but they can't say no to our kids. You're the most effective weapon we have up here, and we need to continue to fight. STAR Act, the last one, most comprehensive childhood cancer bill ever passed by the United States Congress. And we just got to say that. And it was great. It was great being in. Look, our president, he's an entertaining guy. He doesn't sign with the normal, very stylistic pen. He's got a Sharpie, and so that. We're in there, but he looked at Sadie, and you could just see, the compassion he had with respect to her and the bill. And he, again, instead of giving me the pen, which I didn't care about, he gave it to her. And that was so right. Righteous for you to have the pen and not me, because you're the advocate that made it happen. And that was a really special day. And then she met Ivanka. Then I introduced her to Robin O'Neill, the guy that killed Bin Laden. That was quite a day, meet President of the United States, Ivanka, and then Robin O'Neill, the guy that killed Bin Laden. I don't think I can outdo that again. But that was a great group, and you see a lot of people in the room here in that Oval Office when that was signed into law. We got to get the $30 million per year appropriated. I'm told that it's going to happen. It's on the Senate side now, so all the advocates, that's your marching orders, the $30 million to complete the STAR Act. And but we have a lot more to do. I will not rest, and I will not quit until we get this disease, until we've killed it. It kills our children. I want to kill the disease. And it's a global issue. And so we have a couple of things we're thinking about as I close. I want to get y'all to start thinking about the brains in the room and the really know the issue. There are a couple of things. Palliative care. My father didn't have it when he was dying of cancer in the hospital. It's not hospice care, it's palliative care. Sadie, her friend, you brought her by the office. What was her name again? Yeah. Lily. Sweet, 17 years old, very thin. But she had 45 days in the hospital. 45 days. Maybe some of those days she had to be in the hospital, but some of those days she could have been at home. Now, anybody who's ever been in a hospital room, it's not a great experience. I want to, within one day, I want to get out of there. And I can't imagine 45 days. So palliative care is available for adults, but not for children. So we think children should have that same right. It's their right to have that same care. And then the second, and this is kind of more like a moonshot idea, but I want y'all to work with me on it, is, there's a while back we passed something called PEPFAR. It was when the AIDS epidemic was very prevalent, and it was global, and it was under George Bush. We passed PEPFAR, which was a global AIDS movement to stop it and bring the medications where it was necessary and the research for it. I'll talk to Dr. Poplock at Texas Children's Hospital. He's doing a lot of work in Africa, all these different cancers out there globally. Talk to the World Health Organization. I think we can have a global childhood cancer bill. A bill that would reach even beyond the United States of America. And it would also be helpful to the United States to know what cancers are out there globally, impact the United States, but also have an impact on the world. Working with the World Health Organization and with doctors like Dr. Poplock, using the PEPFAR model and the infrastructure that we create to combat AIDS globally, why not combat childhood cancer globally? That's where we want to go. So this is going to be that's going to be a bold mission, but I like going bold. I know Mike, being the new Rodney Notre Dame football coach that he is, we like doing bold things for bold causes, and this is the #1 cause out there. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for being there over the years. This has been a great journey, a lifetime experience for all of us, and I couldn't have done it without you. We've all been there together, and we've all seen it make a difference over the years. And isn't that what life is really all about? Just trying to make a difference in the lives of others and our children and their children. Make it better. Because we're not going to be here. My mother passed away 2 weeks ago. And, we're not going to be here forever. But if we can leave something better for them, that's what it's all about. So thank you so much.
Anytime you can start your day with Mike McCall is a great day. No, seriously. There's so many people. There's 430. I call us the Mike 435 in the Congress. We've got another 100 over to the Senate. So Mike is so right. How do you get from start to finish? And then you find out, well, geez, it just makes so much sense that we should be doing this, right? They say, yeah, it really does. Then why can't we get there? And then people give you that puzzled look. I'll tell you, when it comes to these issues, there's no puzzled look. There's no puzzled look. Hannah, good to see you again this morning. Haley, good to see you. You guys are up and at 'em. Sadie, always good to see you. We really had a great time at the White House that day, and the president was so taken with you, as you know. But last night, Hannah and I were at an event called the Hyundai Hope on Wheels event. And just very brief about this, okay? 20 years, Hyundai, Motor America, and Hyundai dealers launched the mission to fight pediatric cancer. Now, when I first started off, and I'm on the board of directors for it, I don't say that in any ways to be bragging about it, I'm just saying that the buy-in from the dealer was incredible. We started off as a $3 match in a car. $3 from the dealer, $3 from Hyundai Motor America, $6 for every Hyundai sold. It's now $7 from the dealer, $7 from Hyundai Motor America, $14 for every Hyundai sold. Of that money now, we are up past $145 million to find a cure for pediatric cancer. But the one goal is always the same, is it's that no parent, no relative, no friend ever has to hear your child has cancer. And, you know, is it every 38 minutes or every 39 minutes?
36.
Every 36 minutes. You know what, why don't you come up here with me? I want people to see you. No, come on, get up here. Sadie, why don't you come on up here, because I'll tell you what, you all add such a brightness to the room. You cannot look at these little faces. And I would say this all the time. My wife and I have been blessed with 4 children and 10 grandchildren. But when you look at these children, they're not somebody else's children. They're our children. And you just know when you look at them, so you know, you look into their eyes and say, how could we ever not be aware? How can we ever not think that this is a fight worth fighting? How can we ever think that we can give up? Because we just can't. We can't. And being with this guy every day, I've got to tell you, it's been phenomenal. But now listen, I've known her since she was a little girl. She is a cancer survivor. Sadie and I met down at the White House, and I just said, you know what? I mean, you all are the same. You're all the same child. You have these bright eyes. You have this great zest for life. You have this idea that, you know what? I faced it. I beat it. Now, not all of us survive. But I want to tell you something. When you guys show up in a hospital room, it's okay for mom or dad to be there. It's okay for grandma or grandpa or friends to be there. But for a child to look into the eyes of another child, and that child can say, I was in that same situation as you. I've gone through these same worries as you. I've gone through all these horrible things, the same as you. But you know what? You can make it. You can make it. And I'm living proof that you can. So, the time we spent together, and last night Ryan, so we had, every year we have youth ambassadors. So when it was Hannah, then it was Ryan White was the one, and then last night we had Carter and we had Elizabeth. But what they shared last night was not the difficulties they had to go through to get to success, but the fact that they never gave up. And they looked at what they were going through as not a challenge, but an opportunity. And going through their cure, or going through their treatment, and being able to share that with other people was just incredible, because you could feel it. The room last night was filled with life. The room last night was filled with love. The room last night was filled with hope that we can continue to fight, and the faith. Because when you combine hope and faith together, nothing can beat that combination. The hope that we can get there, the faith that we know we can. We know we can. We have the faith in that. So, we spend so much time here, going back and forth on things. And, there's a saying that you do the right things for the right reason, good things happen. And then you wonder, well, why is it so hard to agree one-on-one in a quiet setting that what we're doing is the right thing, and then get on the floor and find out, well, I can't possibly vote for that. Say, why? Well, it just doesn't match up where we need to go. And say, well, what we agreed on is where we need to go is in the right direction. Right direction. It doesn't matter whose idea it is. I mean, how can you be that foolish? It's not my idea. It's not a good idea. That's stupid. That's stupid. So we fight that fight all the time, and I hope that we're getting there. But then when you are around Hannah, Sadie, Carter, and Elizabeth, and Ryan, you really believe that there is great hope for our future, not just as Democrats, Republicans, or Libertarians, but as Americans. If it can't be done here, it can be done anywhere in the world. And if it can't be done now, my question is why? Why? Why can't it be done now? If we believe, if we truly believe that these folks are our future, then I'm betting on the fact that we will come to our senses and say what we're doing is the right thing, for the right reason, and good things are going to happen. So it's always so uplifting to be around you all. You just make me feel good. I'm telling you, it's almost like when I get home. Listen, parents and grandparents, it can get testy. I tried to take 10 of them to church at one time. I was like, oh my God. Can you guys please be quiet? Father speaking. Just keep it down. And he said, I want another cracker. I said, okay, all right. Well, I was in Mass today, by the way. I just want to share this with you. This will be very brief. In Mass today, and I call him Father Fast, this is a priest who's probably in like his late 80s. Honestly, it takes him longer to get from the sacristy to the altar, and the altar to get back to the sacristy, than it actually does for him to perform Mass. his homilies are about 3 to 5 minutes. And don't you wonder sometimes, I don't know why this happens. You know, why you're in one place with a person and the time just seems to be so right. This is like, how did this all happen? It must be divine intervention, right? That something brings us together. It's not by chance. But Father was talking today, and I thought, well, geez, I wonder what he's going to say today. He does in 3 to 5 minutes. Can we talk today about suffering? Suffering. And so the last couple of days, we're around all these folks and with their parents, and know that it was suffering that they were going through. I can't imagine when you get that news that your child has cancer, how it just knocks you to your knees. It's like that punch in the gut. It's like that loss of how and why. And why my daughter? Why my son? Why my grandson? My granddaughter? Why? Why? We can't understand it, but it does knock you to your knees. And the only thing that revives us is our faith. Our faith that we can get through it. The Father talked today about suffering. And I thought it was really unusual because at his age, for him to get up here, he was very clear today, and it was really just for me as, you know what? There was a reason. There was a reason to be in church today. What Father said about suffering, he said human suffering, which we all experience, brings about a realization of what life is really composed of. Because we don't always have great days. We don't always have good times. But when we do have great days and good times, we take it for granted that they're always going to be that way. I don't have to worry. I've got a good job. I've got a nice family. Everything's going well. Until you get that one phone call. Or you run into somebody and you say, oh my God, oh my God. But what Father said is because of the suffering, it leads us in a direction of our faith. And knowing that with the proper faith, we can have the hope for the future, that we can make things right again. So when you see these children, and when you see the parents, and you know what they're going through, no matter how difficult it gets, you still have that faith that if we stay together, that if we lock arms, that if we truly become brothers in arms, this young man here, I mean, it's been just so uplifting for me to have people join for one purpose and one purpose only. And that's playing through the whistle. And people say, what does that mean? I said, you don't quit when you hear the whistle, you play right through the whistle. So if you're a sprinter, you don't start to pull up at the end of the 100-yard dash, you run through it. You run 110 yards to make sure that when you pass that tape, you're actually going full speed. If you play it through the whistle, you don't quit the whistle, but you play through the whistle. And that's where true success comes from. Today, be with you all. What a great day. I don't care. When I walked in, I said, hey, everybody's in Washington today but Elizabeth. They said, geez, Elizabeth, who has the storm? The storm Elizabeth. She hasn't shown up yet. And I think this week is going to be a great week, and we're going to celebrate. More than celebrate, I think we're going to acknowledge the fact that this is truly a battle that we're all in together, and a fight that we're not going to walk away from, and we're going to keep trying to get there and trying to get there and trying to get there. So God bless you all for being here, getting up early and coming here, traveling whatever distance you take to be here. But when you see us all together, you know there's a win. There's a win coming in. It's always so good to see you. I can't believe how she's grown up so fast. And Sadie, I just met you down at the White House for the first time, but you're always so bright. You guys just, there's something about your eyes that I noticed. That's where you see it. You look into their eyes, you know what? You're not good. You're not good. So listen, hey, God bless you all. Let's try to make the most of our time together. It's to draw on each other's strengths. And for some of those that need a hand up, let's offer that hand. And for some of those that have been doing that job for so long, let's just thank them for being there for us. So God bless. Thanks all for being here. Bye.
So I think next Gavin's going to come up. We do have some artwork in the room from, well, there's a Sadie's self-portrait when she was in the hospital, and I see a lot of her work, but you know, this is artwork from children with cancer, and it really says a lot. But anyway, Gavin's going to come up and talk about the foundation, and then one of the NCI director.
morning, everybody. Somehow I always seem to have to follow Congressman Kelly, and that's just not fair. Let me begin by thanking Chairman McCall and the Congressman and G.K. Butterfield and Jackie Spear and everyone who's involved in this caucus. It's just amazing, and they deserve a big round of applause, so please. So it's great to be here again. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces as well. As has been said, this is the 9th annual Congressional Childhood Cancer Caucus Summit. This event is just amazing. Not even a hurricane can stop this thing. And it's just a privilege to be involved in the event again this year. Of course, stating the obvious, we're all here for the kids, right? We're all here to make life better for kids who have been diagnosed with cancer and work in memory of those who are no longer with us. And I know we have some kids here in the audience, and they're our heroes, and I just want to ask all the kids to stand up and be recognized. So please, if you would, just stand up, please. Sully. I don't know if Sully is here.
He's doing his math homework.
Oh. Sully's dad?
Yeah.
All right. So Sully was at the Golden Toast last night, for those of you who were there, and he got up and just made this remarkable presentation. And speaking in public is one of everybody's great fears, right? And this little boy got up and just gave the most incredible talk. And at the end, and Dad, you know, correct me if I don't have the quote just right, but he said his daily mantra is, quote, "Life isn't fair, but suck it up." And I thought, that is a young man who's wise beyond his years and is going to do great things in life. So please give Sully our best. And a round of applause for Sully. And Congressman, before I go any farther, I want to make sure that you give Linda a big thank you and hello from all of us. I know she's not here today, but she's been a champion for this cause as well. And I do need another round of applause for Linda McCall. So it's been touched on a little bit, but it's just remarkable what this caucus has accomplished over the years. These gentlemen, our friends in the Senate, all of the advocates around the room, think about it. Over the years that we've gathered here, we have seen the enactment, the passage and signing into law, the Creating Hope Act, the RACE Act, the STAR Act, the Gabriella Miller Act, the pediatric components of the Cancer Moonshot, and year after year after year of pediatric cancer funding research through the Department of Defense. And that is a record of accomplishment that exceeds any other disease community that I'm aware of. And it's one that all of us can be very, very proud of. But as we know, there's much more to be done, right? There's much more work to be done. Our work is not done, as the Congressman said, until we have a cure for every childhood cancer, and until we have less toxic treatments for those cancers that do not put kids at risk for challenges later in life. Now, I'm a fan of the old NBC show, The West Wing. Some of you may remember that, some of you older folks in the audience. And one episode, Martin Sheen, also known as President Bartlett, he's standing in front of a room of young people, and he tells them, decisions are made by those who show up. And he's right. And everybody in this room shows up. You show up to this every September. You show up to the lobby days in the spring. You show up at the district visits in August, and you show up on social media. And what you've done is just remarkable. And I want to thank all of you for showing up, because you're making a big, big difference for kids who are in the fight and kids who are going to be diagnosed in the days to come. Because as far as I'm concerned, there's just no more important issue for this town to work on than our issue. It's about our kids, and it's about our country. It's about our country's most important resource, our children, who are the future of this country, and all the promise that they can bring for a better tomorrow. So again, thanks to all of you, and thanks to our leaders for all of the success. Now, I think many of you in the room know why I'm here. I'm here because of this guy. my son Evan. 12 years ago this week, my wife Wendy and I found ourselves just up the road, literally just up the road on North Capitol Street, at Children's National Medical Center, being told that our perfect 3-year-old son had something called stage 4 NMIC amplified neuroblastoma. 4 years later, in October of 2010, we lost Evan after what was just a brutal and heart-wrenching battle that defined courage and defined strength. And Evan was our only child. And as we collectively suffered through the years in treatment with Evan, we quickly realized that it wasn't a fair fight. The odds were overwhelmingly stacked against Evan and in favor of this thing called neuroblastoma. So in his memory, Wendy and I chose to continue the fight by establishing the Evan Foundation in 2011. And to me, to us, the Evan Foundation is like the little engine that could. You talk about the Evan Foundation, you're really talking about Wendy, who is our day-to-day, full-time, non-paid volunteer executive director. But over the course of 7 short years, we have funded $500,000 in neuroblastoma research grants at institutions all across this country. And we've provided annual support for a young neuroblastoma investigator at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Neuroblastoma Research Lab, good folks in Philadelphia, Congressman. And most impactful, I think, to Wendy and me is our Treats and Treasures Cards program. And I talk about this all the time, but you'll indulge me just a little bit more. This is a program that we started back in 2012 at Children's. And every Wednesday, Wendy and I, truth be told, I'm not always there because I'm off doing something at work, but every Wednesday without fail, Wendy is at Children's on the oncology floor visiting all the kids with these 2 cards. And over the years, we've made over 8,000 visits to patients and families with these cards. And thanks to Wendy's hard work, over the past year, we've expanded this program to 3 other sites that treat kids with cancer, including the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I want to say 2 other quick things about this. One of our favorite customers, Fletcher from Children's, is here. Where's Fletcher? He went to the back. So take my word for it. Fletcher's here, and we used to see Fletcher every Wednesday, but I'm happy to say that he's not in the hospital now. He's here with us, so that's just fantastic. And the final thing I want to say is I think most folks in the room recognize the guy in the middle, right? That's our dear friend, Congressman Chris Van Hollen. We live in Maryland. He was a strong member of this caucus when he was here in the House and a real champion for these issues in the Senate. This was taken about a year ago. This was September 11th last year. And coincidentally, just about a month ago, we saw the senator at, of all places, Wooltrap. We were at a concert. We ran into him, literally. And I hadn't seen him in a while, and so I sort of reintroduced myself and Wendy. And he said, without missing a beat, he said, "Oh my gosh, you'll never forget that day at the hospital with those cards that you brought around with the kids." And he was just gushing about the experience. So this is something that we do out of love. And every time we go into a patient's room, it reminds us of Evan. It reminds us of his compassion. And we try to do a little bit of good for families every day that we're in the hospital. So I need to just say a quick word about the moms in the room, and I'm going to start with my favorite mom, Wendy. Being a dad of a child with cancer is very, very difficult. But being a mom with a child with cancer is probably the worst thing in the world. So I want all the moms to stand up, get a round of applause. So everybody stand up. Those were true heroes in the room. And Wendy was Evan's everything. Best friend, caregiver, nurse, confidant, and I just can't say enough about the wonderful work that the moms do. Finally, I want to say a special word of thanks Congressman McCall and the caucus and Congresswoman DeGette for their leadership on this palliative care issue, Congressman, that you talked about. Unfortunately, we experienced firsthand the overwhelming need for better quality hospice care for kids with cancer. And that experience, quite frankly, is going to haunt me, haunt us for the rest of our lives. And I'm so glad it's getting some attention here with Congress. And Evan's story is told, this is a little blurry, but Evan's story is told in Institute of Medicine report from a few years ago. This is the cover. This is Evan right here. In a black shirt. And I testified at this IOM meeting as this report was being put together. And I told Evan's story, and I'm not going to go through Evan's story this morning, but let me just say that it's a story that no family should ever have to tell. And if you're interested in what these kids go through and how we can make things better for them, just read this report. And I know that there are other people here in the room who participated in this IOM study, and we've got to do better by these kids, because if we can't take care of kids who are dying in this country in the best possible way, then what are we doing? What is the point? So again, I want to thank you both for taking this on. It's incredibly important, and you have my commitment that I'll do everything I can to help move that forward as well. So I want to move on to our featured speaker of the morning. And there's a little bit of good news, bad news. So I think that folks who saw the agenda earlier in the week saw that we were scheduled to have a couple of speakers from the CDC come and talk to us. But unfortunately, because of the storm, they weren't able to make it. So that's the bad news. The good news is that just leaves more time to hear from the Nci director, which I think is a great thing. And you know, it's always really challenging to give an appropriate and worthy introduction for someone who has such a distinguished and accomplished resume as Dr. Sharpless, but I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best to do that this morning. Dr. Sharpless was officially sworn in as the 15th director of the National Cancer Institute on October 17, 2017, so almost a year in service. Prior to his appointment, he served as the director of the University of North Carolina Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center, a position he held since January of 2014. Dr. Sharpless was a Moorhead Scholar at UNC Chapel Hill. Any Tar Heels in the house? There's one back there. And he received his undergraduate degree in mathematics. He went on to pursue his medical degree from the UNC School of Medicine, graduating with honors and distinction in 1993. He then completed his internal medicine residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital and Hematology Oncology Fellowship at Dana-Farber Partners Cancer Care, both of Harvard Medical School in Boston. After 2 years on the faculty at Harvard, he joined the faculty at UNC School of Medicine in the departments of medicine and genetics in 2002. I told you this was an accomplished CV. He has authored more than 150 original scientific papers, reviews, and book chapters, and is an inventor on 10 patents. And if that weren't enough, he's co-founded 2 biotechnology companies, G1 Therapeutics and HealthSpan Diagnostics. In addition to serving as the director of the NCI, Dr. Sharpless continues his own research on the biology of cancer, and he's here today to give us an update on the NCI's pediatric cancer research portfolio, including how the STAR Act will enhance those efforts. So please give a warm round of applause for Dr. Sharpless.
Thank you for the warm introduction. I have to share a story. This is reminding me of something that happened. So when I first took this job, before I'd even been sworn in, I was invited to one of these Washington events. There was a dinner, and unbeknownst to me, at the end of dinner, everybody stands up and makes remarks. And we had some real pros there, Greg Walden and Roy Blunt, and Scott Gottlieb from the FDA, and Francis Collins, who I think you probably heard from the NIH. And they stood up and gave these seemingly unprepared, wonderful remarks that were so inspiring and so dramatic. And then everybody looked at me and said, "Your turn." And I kind of stammered through my remarks, and I excited. I'm a much better scientist than public speaker, I assure you. And I went home that night, and my wife called me, and she said, "How'd that go?" And I said, "Well, I need to up my game." Because it's clear, when you follow the 3 prior speakers, how great they are communicating their passion and interest in this topic. But I suspect one of the reasons why they're particularly eloquent about this subject is not only are they just great speakers, but they also really care about this. This is the thing that drives them, it gets them up in the day, it makes them come to work, it makes them do what they do. So that's just the best. When you have someone who's good at what they do and they're good at communicating it and they care about it, you hear the kinds of things we've heard this morning. So I'd like to thank both the Congressman here for their leadership on these important acts and their support of the NIH. We heard about that. A lot of the legislative accomplishments we heard about were things that were of benefit to incentivize the pharmaceutical industry to do more in pediatric cancer, very needed and important. But from my point of view as NCI director, what is particularly important has been a few things. The STAR Act that we'll talk about a bit in a minute. But I think it's also important to notice that we're about to close in on the 2019 budget, hopefully, very soon, that will provide another $2 billion for the NIH. So that'll be the 4th year in a row of multi-billion-dollar funding for the NIH. I think it's likely like $9 billion over 4 years of additional funding for the NIH. Of that, about $1 billion goes to the NCI. So that is tremendous. That is the one way to rise, sort of make all boats rise, is to have funding for all cancers and basic science to support that research increase in such a staggering way. And that is really a testament to the broad bipartisan support for cancer research. But it's also, I think, a real testament to you guys, because that happens because the Congress hears that we need more research for cancer. And they learn that because of the advocacy community. People like you go and talk to your congressman and convince them what a need and what an emergency this is and why we have to do more. And although the progress to date has been great, there's certainly more we can do. I'd also like to thank Congressman Butterfield and Congressman Spear couldn't be here today. They've been important leaders for this as well. As mentioned, Congressman Spear has a medical issue. I know why Congressman Butterfield is not here. My aunt actually lives in his district, I think, in eastern North Carolina. She's 87, refused to leave. As I told her, you don't want to be one of those people standing on your roof, holding your dog on CNN. But she's, a crusty North Carolinian who's, I've been through like 30 hurricanes. This one's not going to get me. So, but that is as a North Carolinian, I watch with great worry about my multiple family members down there today. So let's talk a bit about my favorite topic, right? I think I'm probably not well known to this community. I, as mentioned, have been in the job about a year. So I trained as an oncologist, so I'm a cancer doctor. I took care of predominantly adult patients with leukemia, so I was a medical oncologist. I know a lot about the complications and difficulties of treating people with leukemia and putting them in the hospital for months at a time, and the sort of psychiatric burden of just being sick that long, being treated that long. And so I'm familiar with those issues. I was not a pediatric oncologist. I certainly took care of a number of what's come to be called AYA patients. These are adults and young adolescents with leukemia, for example, 19-year-olds with the ALL and things like that. But I was reasonably familiar with the basic biology of childhood cancer and the new therapies emerging for childhood cancer. I've been a member of the advisory boards of a number of places that have great childhood cancer programs like MD Anderson and St. Jude's. So I was aware of some of the issues, but I have to say I've learned a lot since I started in this job. I've been taught a lot by this group, by people here in the room, have really sort of raised my consciousness regarding childhood cancer, but also by things like this. So shown here is Camp Fantastic, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's a camp that's been put on. It started by Phil Pizzo and now mostly run by Stephen Shannick, who's shown in the picture, for childhood patients with cancer, many of whom are undergoing active treatment. They give chemotherapy up in the camp, but also survivors. And it's just a place to be a kid. They're pretty militant about this. They do not want anybody to think about cancer while they're there. So they accommodate the needs of therapy as best as they can, but this is a week to relax. They don't even sort of let the clinical trials people come in and ask surveys and things like that. I mean, it's really terrific. And what you see here is our scary face competition. You see, I'm a pretty scary guy with a thriller pose. And you see all the terrific kids, and some of them are cured, some of them have active disease, many of them are struggling with significant survivorship issues. And that's one of the things you learn when you become NCI director that you didn't know when you were a medical oncologist. Survivorship as an adult oncologist is a significant problem. And so make no mistake, you treat 40-year-olds with breast cancer and they get leukemia 10 years later as a second malignancy. That's horrible and a big deal. But survivorship to pediatric oncology is just another level. And that was something I didn't really understand until I took this job. And I went to places like Camp Fantastic, and you see the side effects of surgery and high doses of chemotherapy is mentioned, and radiation, and the problems that causes, and the lifelong issues that will lead to. And so now I get it. I get, why we need better therapies, but I also get why we, particularly for childhood cancer, need less toxic therapies and better ways of curing people. And so I think there's been a lot of great progress in that area, and we'll talk about that. I think, when we talk about childhood cancer, you have to sort of say two things that are equally true. One is that we're making a lot of progress. More kids are surviving cancer than ever before. We have new therapies, some of them very exciting, some of them very based on really cool basic science. But at the same time, while that's true, while there's been progress, we also have to admit that progress is not sufficient. There's still too many children dying of cancer, and these survivorship issues that I mentioned can be devastating. I'd like to talk about one kid in particular I knew when I was cancer center director at the University of North Carolina, a guy named Winkeny Stainless. I think he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when he was about 4. And the story I think will be familiar to this audience. He got traditional, very heavy cytotoxic chemotherapy, multiple rounds. Most patients with ALL are cured that way, but he was one of the small percentage of patients that was not. He then was decided he would need a bone marrow transplant, but there was no way to get him in remission, right? So the chemotherapy wasn't working. We generally don't transplant patients who aren't in remission, so he needed a miracle, basically. He had no hope, literally. And I've had many patients like this with ALL that I've treated in my career, who at that stage go home with hospice and die of the disease. But Phineas, his parents had heard about this new thing called CAR T therapy, and they started looking for slots, and this is like 2008, this is a while ago, and they found a trial at the National Cancer Institute, and they found a slot on the trial, and they came up here. And then they harvested Phineas's T cells. I think you know how this works, right? You hook up the machine, you take out the T cells. Those things are then ex vivo engineered. They're grown outside the body for like a couple of weeks and transduced with a vector to create this CAR receptor, and then they're reinfused with Phineas, and you wait. At a time when everything else is failing. So I'll come back to Phineas in a moment. But let me just say why I'm here. So glad to be here. So, as I mentioned, I did a few things that as a cancer director that were relevant. When I was at the University of North Carolina, I started a first GMP facility to make CAR T cells. We used $20 million of state money for that, which sounds like a lot, but that is actually not enough. And we knew that at the time. We knew we would not have sufficient funding to really do what we wanted to do. But my statement was that if we build this, and we were able to develop a technology that can cure 7-year-olds with acute leukemia, we will be able to raise money to support that program from the NIH and from foundations, one of which was Hyundai Hope on Wheels. So they supported that program, one of the investigators, and it was correct. That program is now enrolling patients furiously, and it's been very successful because there was no shortage of support for a new good idea. I also ran a trial of next generation sequencing where we sequenced 3,000 patients to try and identify the mutations that drive their cancer, including many children. And that sort of trial, molecularly targeted precision oncology, was a precursor to something like the MATCH trial, or the Pediatric MATCH trial, which now the NCI runs. So very important things. And as mentioned, I was on the advisory boards of places like St. Jude's and MD Anderson. I also ran a lab. I was a scientist, and I studied how these side effects of chemotherapy accelerate aging. And this is a relevant topic to anybody who's cured of their cancer. They want to know, yes, they're cured of their cancer, but the chemotherapy and the radiation, what long-term pro-aging related side effects are they likely to suffer? And so this was really a survivorship question before survivorship was kind of a thing. I was working on that long before it had a name. One of our first projects, in fact, we tried to do, which was a failure, but we're still trying to do it today, was to work with St. Jude's to look at the effects of chemotherapy on their very long life cohorts. So these patients who were treated, in some cases 40 and 50 years ago, and have been cured of cancer, and are very long-term survivors of things like ALL. and we wanted to see how the therapy for ALL many years ago had changed their adult biology. And you know, I think that cohort, that survivorship cohort, and ones like it, like the childhood survivor cohort run by the NCI, are really national treasures. Those are really important research efforts that allowed us to make a lot of progress on that topic. But it's a really interesting molecular biology question, survivorship. It's not just the consequences of therapy, but the, you know, why does it happen? You know, I think, why do, you know, kids will get all these anthracyclines and they're fine, and then someday, 30 years later, their heart decides it's had enough. You know, why is that late toxicity? How does the heart remember? You know, how did it know? What is the cellular biology of that? I think that's a very fascinating scientific question. I think that's an area where the NCI is eager to invest, not just the symptom management of survivorship, but actually the why of survivorship. Why does it happen, and how do we prevent it from happening? And let's not just describe these things, but can we actually fix them in some cases? So these are topics I care passionately about, and why I'm happy to be here today. Let me talk for a moment about the STAR Act. So I will say, you know, thank you again to the people in this room who helped produce this magnificent achievement, the advocacy group, the leaders in Congress. This is a real tool, as mentioned, for the National Cancer Institute. It gives us a set of goals and powers that make our ability to treat and study and work on and actually influence the outcome of childhood cancer much greater. And we look forward to implementing the STAR Act. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we've already started to do in that regard. So first off, we have been asked to get additional voices of pediatric cancer on our advisory boards in the STAR Act, and that is well underway. Those individuals have to be appointed by the White House, and so we are working with the executive branch to try and identify new people to talk to the NCI and represent boards, represent the causes of pediatric cancer. Similarly, we are tasked with new funding announcements in survivorship research. And so the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences has been working hard on this topic, and I suspect, I'm very confident, that we will have a new funding announcement related to childhood cancer and survivorship to announce in 2019. So coming soon. And I think that that will allow for the extramural research community to really dig into this topic, because funding is really how we get new scientists in the field and how we encourage them to work on these areas. There is a tremendous incentive on biorepository work on how we are going to bank samples for later research efforts. I feel passionately that banking samples is not really enough, that we need the useful samples that have not only the information about the child at the time they were diagnosed, but more longitudinal information about what happened to them. So samples with solely demographic information are not nearly as useful, we found, as clinically annotated samples. And that's why something like the STAR Act is so helpful, because as alluded, there are these, this is not a nefarious thing, but there are these sort of silos that have created for a variety of reasons that make data sharing sometimes hard. And that is because of legitimate worries about privacy and data security. But now that we can say, look, Congress has told us we have to do this. We have to do research. We have to bank samples. We have to keep the right kind of samples with the right kind of information. I think it will be easier for the NCI to herd these cats and get everyone in line in a way that will be more meaningful for everyone. Let's see. So in summary, thanks to the leadership of this group, we really are have sort of hit the ground running in the implementation of the STAR Act. I'd also like to talk to you a moment about the related topic that I alluded to, which is the use of big data. So how the NCI handles data is a key area of focus for me, in making sure that we get data, as I stated, on patients and aggregate these data and then make them available to the research community in a way that's safe and secure is a very high priority. This turns out to be difficult for a lot of reasons. One of them is the sort of siloed nature of academia. Another is that it's just really hard to do. It requires a big investment of resources. These different databases don't talk to each other. You got to put everything in the cloud. All the personnel that works on these things are quite expensive because they're so valuable to industry. You have to convince them to know not to go work for Google, but to come work for the NCI. Look, good news there, though, that many of them will tell me. I've met some of these young data scientists, and you know, I'll ask them why they've taken such a pay cut to work at the National Cancer Institute as opposed to, you know, hotels.com or something, and they say they want to do something meaningful. You know, helping find cure for cancer is an appealing gig. So we have been able to make some progress there. I want to explain why it's important. I don't know if everybody appreciates exactly why this is such an issue. I mean, it's you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, they're all buzzwords, they're in the news very much today. But you know, the real world example works like this. So one day I was coming into my kitchen and I pulled the mail out of the mailbox and I had a copy of a new New England Journal. You know, I read that every week. That's the new findings in medicine. And there was an article about leukemia, treating patients with leukemia, a disease I had treated for 20 years. And I read that article and I literally got a little sick and almost felt my knees buckle as I realized that it was reporting a 100-patient study, which is a tiny study, a very small number of patients at a single institution, WashU, in St. Louis, where they had sequenced all the patients. So they'd done the genomic information of these patients' leukemia and then followed them with standard treatment. And in that kind of leukemia of patients that age, you kind of have two choices. You have a regimen called 7 and 3, you have a regimen called cytidine, that doesn't matter. But the point is, we sort of use them interchangeably. So I had been treating patients for 20 years, kind of sometimes I'd give this one, sometimes I'd give that one. The rationale wasn't really that good why we would pick one versus the other. One was a bit less toxic, one we thought was a bit, you know, more likely to work, but for the most part we use them somewhat interchangeably. And then this very small study at a single institution found that the reason we thought they were equivalent is because one of the regimens worked in half the patients and the other regimen worked in the other half of the patients. And if you gave the wrong drug to the right person, it didn't work. And that was guided by a single gene, P53, the most commonly mutated gene in that kind of cancer. So this was, you can think of this as a victory, right? Now we understand how to take care of leukemia patients better. That's good news. Kudos to Tim Lay and his colleagues at WashU. But the reason it made me feel so uncomfortable is because I can just close my eyes and I can see the faces that I've treated in the last 20 years with some of these really terrible chemotherapies who had terrible outcomes or who didn't respond. And the statistics are just inescapable. Some of those people, in retrospect, got what was probably the wrong drug. They got the wrong regimen because we didn't know. If we aggregated data, if we just took everybody with leukemia, sequenced them, put them all in a data set with clinical information, that kind of a finding would fall out instantly. You know, there is a happy silver lining to this story. Now the NCI is running trials that dedicate the right therapy for the right disease in AML and the right therapy for the, you know, so we have used this knowledge and changed our practice, and this is good for patients. But why couldn't we get there sooner? And another problem, if you think about it, is that that's a really common molecular lesion. It's that P53 is mutated in like half the patients with AML, so it breaks them into two groups very easily. But we have a lot of mutations that are really important in cancer that are happening in 5% of the patients, or 0.5% of the patients. One can't do a clinical trial devoted to those patients specifically. They're too rare. So if we're going to make progress, we have to have large aggregated data sets with thousands of patients, hundreds of thousands of patients, where we follow them, where we have the radiology, we have the histology, we have the clinical information, we have the genomic sequencing, we have all of these data put together in a way that's multimodal, interoperable, usable, and available to the scientific community. I would point out here, in many places we do want special efforts for pediatric cancer, but here we do not. As you get these data sets, you want them linked to the other data sets. You don't want them to be hidden away somewhere where an academic investigator needs a special, you know, passkey or something to use. You just want it with all the other data, because what's going to happen is some basic scientist who doesn't know much about adult cancer, basic cancer, or really cancer at all, is going to search this database for the gene they're interested in. And if the childhood data isn't in there, they won't find it. So linkage of the data sets is really important. And of course, in a way that is safe and secure, and honors data privacy, HIPAA compliant, obeys federal law. Those things are a priority, but it's doable. We can do both. We can have safe, usable data sets. I'm going to say a word about the Cancer Moonshot. As mentioned, the Cancer Moonshot had a number of things that it specifically conceived for childhood cancer. You know, as many of you probably remember, it was identified as sort of 10 areas for key focus. And they were largely, were all things where we thought there was an opportunity to go from a sort of near clinical usage into clinical usage. So it was the goal was to rapidly translate things from sort of the bench or the late preclinical area into clinical usage. And as mentioned, all the areas of the moonshot, all of the 10 key focus areas have some connection to childhood cancer, but a few were really specifically with childhood cancer in mind. So one was this program related to fusion oncoproteins. So as many of you know, childhood cancer can be different genetically from adult cancers, and the number of mutations can be much smaller. So instead of having thousands of mutations in the cancer, certain childhood cancers may have a very small number of mutations, and often one of the driver mutations will be one of these fusion proteins, where two genes that aren't normally near each other get stuck together by translocation, and then that drives a malignant event. And those turn out to be really hard to treat therapeutically. So some of them just activate the normal gene, and those are easier to treat. So, we've had some recent successes in that regard. But the ones that create these sort of chimeric proteins, it's half protein A and half protein B, they are often very hard to drug because they're this class of molecule called a transcription factor, and they do something biochemically that has not been easily accessible to medicinal chemistry. But that's changed. We have new ideas about how to drug these events. They tend to be in rare malignancies, so they haven't been a priority for the pharmaceutical industry. So I think this is a real opportunity for the NCI to invest in the kind of basic science, not to find out about those genes, we know they exist, not to understand their basic biology and that kind of stuff, but really to look, how do we target them? What approach would you use to get rid of a fusion oncoprotein in someone with a kind of cancer that's driven by that? So rhabdomyosarcoma and diseases of that ilk. So one of the most common fusion oncoproteins in childhood cancer is the EWS-ETS or EWS-fly fusion oncoproteins that cause Ewing sarcoma, a difficult to treat childhood soft tissue cancer. And so one of the new consortia we've just announced the funding for is at the Dana-Farber, run by Dr. Kim Stegmeyer, pediatric oncologist at Farber, I've known a long time. And they have a remarkable kind of all-star team of computational biologists and medicinal chemists and cancer researchers coming together, and pediatric oncologists, importantly, coming together to really try to figure out how to move the needle in this topic. And we have several other fusion oncoprotein grants that are being announced as well too. So I think we really have a fresh take and a new invigorated research mission in those areas, and we'll be very excited to see how that goes. Similarly, in the other area where I think the Moonshot plans to have a lot of pediatric oncology research is in immunotherapy. So as mentioned, immunotherapy has been really a game changer for adult oncology. We have therapies now for things like melanoma and lung cancer. Those were sort of the most refractory cancers imaginable when I was a fellow, and now we're curing patients. Jimmy Carter, for example, in his 90s, and he's surviving a brain metastasis from melanoma, just something I never thought I'd see in my career. But the penetration of immunotherapy into childhood cancer has been more difficult. So as mentioned, the CAR T program, the cellular immunotherapy, that certainly works. That's able to cure certain kinds of leukemias and lymphomas, but hasn't had a lot of success in solid tumors yet. And then the checkpoint inhibitors, these antibodies that you see on TV that work in lung cancer and melanoma, they haven't worked so well in most childhood cancers. So we want to know why, and we want to know, is there a way we can make those cancers more sensitive to those agents? So can we get this sort of fourth modality? We talk about surgery, radiation, traditional chemotherapy, and now immunotherapy is the fourth way of treating cancer. Can we get that fourth modality to be highly relevant in pediatric cancers? And so the NCI has a big portfolio in that area, and in particular certain new networks for immuno-oncology research focused solely on childhood cancer. So for example, we were just announced funding to James Olson at the Fred Hutchinson in Seattle to lead a multi-institutional network to develop combination immunotherapy approaches in neuroblastoma, a difficult childhood solid tumor as mentioned earlier. This approach uses cellular immunotherapy. So the idea is to try and target antigens on the tumor cell in multiple ways. So to have sort of this sort of cool idea where one T cell may make two different receptors, and so they'll be highly specific. The idea is that you can treat just the cancer in a very selective way without causing the toxicity that you've seen some cellular immunity approaches in other settings. And it will target an antigen in neuroblastoma that's common, called glycocan-2 if you're an aficionado. And we hope that this exciting new approach will work in cancers beyond neuroblastoma. So we think that should we be able to get to work in a cancer like that that's been refractory and difficult, we could then consider targeting other kinds of malignancies using the same approach. So lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the topic of basic science. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact. So let me tell you, I know if you're like watching the Masters on TV, the commercials between golf shots are for Keytruda or one of these immuno-oncology drugs. And it really suggests that if you have lung cancer, you get this drug and you're going to be fine, and that's actually not true. Many patients with lung cancer do not benefit from immunotherapy. But it provides this sort of hype for that disease that is not totally without merit. I mean, we really have seen remarkable achievements in certain cancers. But if you're interested in pancreatic cancer or childhood brain tumors or refractory neuroblastoma, that can't feel real good to see this progress in those diseases and you say, what about the disease I care about? What about the cancer that my loved one has? Why aren't we making progress in that in the same regard? And to me, what that looks like is, in most cases, a lack of understanding of biology of the tumor. We make progress when we sort of know how the cancer works. And when we don't have great ideas for the cancer, we can't make a lot of progress, because just finding a drug that's going to work in these cancers, where we've tested so many things in the past and they haven't worked, it's not going to happen by luck. So we really have to double down and continue to invest in the basic science to understand why certain tumors, how they come about, and why they exist, and what we can do about them. And so that's an area where the NCI is always going to spend a big part of our portfolio on things that sound fairly esoteric and exotic to anyone but a cell biologist. But that's important, because that's where the really good ideas come from. They start in the lab. We've talked about two already. Well, we've talked about one already, which is the CAR-T program. It's Novartis and Celgene now have FDA-approved drugs for CD19 CAR. There are a number of other CARs in development that are very exciting. But it's important to remember that that research started in labs like that of Steve Rosenberg at the NCI many years ago. He labored in the vineyard alone. People sort of thought he was insane, I will admit, for a while, but he thought cells could be made to cure cancer, and he was one of the first people to treat a human with a CAR-T cell and induce a remission. And that was decades of painstaking, intricate, elegant biological investigation. It's paying off today, but it didn't happen by accident. Another story that's very exciting in the news a lot is this drug called larotrectinib, which inhibits a kinase called Intrec, which is formed by a fusion of it. And larotrectinib is marvelously active in patients with the Intrec fusions, many of whom are children. It's a rare mutation. It's sort of 0.1 or 1% of human cancer, so it's not a common event. But if you have that mutation and we identify you and we get you on that drug, you're likely to respond, and I suspect it will be FDA approved shortly for the indication of Intrec fusion positive malignancies. That story started in 1986 at Frederick, Maryland, at the NCI, where a young scientist named Mariano Barbacid, who's now become one of Spain's most famous scientists, but at that time he was an unknown assistant professor or something, but he discovered this weird fusion event that cancers had, and everybody else was finding this gene RAS over and over again, but Mariano found Intrec. And he said, hey, this is weird. Two genes are stuck together that aren't supposed to be stuck together, and that was the first fusion oncoprotein found. He had no interest in childhood cancer. That was not what he was working on. He didn't set out that day to really cure even any kind of cancer. He was just trying to understand the biology of malignant conversion. But yet now, years later, it's led to a marvelous new therapy that has almost no toxicity and great efficacy. So that's exciting. But that's we need more of. We need that for DIPG and refractory brain cancer and neuroblastoma and the refractory unions and these tumors we're unable to treat, and the terrible refractory hematologic malignancies that I used to deal with. So basic science is going to be something we're going to do because there are areas where we just need new ideas. So let me turn back to Phineas. So what happened was, as opposed to how the story usually goes for every other patient I've ever cared for with refractory ALL. Phineas was able to come to the NCI, get infused with CAR T cells, and promptly, within days, go into deep and complete remission. The way CAR T cells do what they do. And because of that, he then, once he's in remission, he's able to get a bone marrow transplant. He got that, and now I see him about once a year when I go to Chapel Hill, and he swings on the jungle gym, and he's in like 5th grade now or something. I mean, he is a normal, happy, healthy kid who is a childhood cancer survivor. And that's a great story, but we need more stories like that. And so my job is to try to figure out how that happens. And certainly, I need a lot of help. And that's why I'm so glad that you guys are here to provide that help. So thank you for the opportunity to come today. I'd be happy to take questions if there are any. This is usually not a shout crowd, so I expect it to be few. Maybe in the back there. Sure, shout, please, because we.
Thank you.
Ah.
And I appreciate the focus on basic research because it's causes and conditions and research into that seems to get overlooked or looked.
I apologize, there's like an air conditioning vent behind me, so I'm having a little trouble hearing. So.
That's fine. I'm speaking for thousands of kids who will never be able to advocate because they all die. And I appreciate so much the focus on basic research because I believe that's a very important component in finding actual causes and conditions. But many of us parents would like the human elements to be just as important as the industrial one in the choices regarding research grant funding. There are many scientists, amazing scientists we have in the United States that do research the deadliest pediatric cancer, brain cancer, which is the IPT, which you mentioned. They need research funding. Parents fund that research almost exclusively, although I'm not discounting the amazing things that COG and KENOC and the groups around the country are trying to do collaboratively. But we parents have been wanting a conversation. I first came here 5 years ago, and no one would talk about 4%, the dreaded number, right? NCI is childhood cancer research's greatest champion. I am not here to criticize that in any way. I'm just saying that it's important to have the element of the vulnerability of the population, our children, as well as high mortality rates when considering research. We actually have a little people bill in the House of Representatives right now. And that's all it does. It's called the DIPG Awareness Resolution. And all it does is ask that the pediatric and high mortality rate cancers have greater consideration for research funding. And just raise awareness to the overall inadequacy of our system to properly address pediatric cancer. We're doing that right now, and that's wonderful, but these kids will never be able to advocate for other kids. They'll never have a voice. And if my voice is annoying, I apologize, but I have to say something for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the comments. Let me say a couple of things about that. So first off, I hear you. I get it. I mean, I may be the first NCI director since Nci Budget that used to take care of patients, right? I mean, usually it's a basic scientist. Those were great guys. You know, they were really wonderful researchers and did marvelous things. But I think unless you walked into the room and told someone you're going to give chemotherapy and promised them things would be okay, and then things aren't. If you don't have that experience of treating patients, it's hard to understand how difficult this is for people who have to not only have the cancer, but have loved ones who have the cancer and have to survive their loved ones once they're gone. So I hear you, and I do not need to be convinced that we need to do more great stuff in pediatric cancer, and I am fully committed to that. Now, the other thing I have to admit, though, there's a reality we have to acknowledge, which is that the NCI is a big ship, and you don't turn the NCI like this. You turn the NCI like this, right? So we're working to steer it in an area that will support childhood cancer to a greater degree, but it's going to take a while, so bear with me. But I promise you, when you have me back in a year or two, we'll have more stuff to talk about that'll be good. Let me just say for a minute the 4% number, because I think that is important to talk about, and thank you for bringing it up. So a couple of things. So first off, one of the most important things to note, maybe the most important thing to note about this whole thing, is that the NCI budget in the last 4 years has gone up by $1 billion. So 4% of what it was a couple of years ago versus 4% today, that's still a big increase. So thank you, Congress, for that. Because that's one terrific solution that we all can get behind. Additionally, Congress has asked us to look at the portfolio of childhood diseases within the NIH. This has been led by Diana Bianchi of Child Health. And by their analysis, the number presently, today, is more than 4%. It's more like 7%. So that number's gone up, I think, from the old days. So on an absolute and percentage basis, we're making progress. And the last thing I'll say, though, is one problem I have with whatever number we spend on childhood cancer, while kids are dying of cancer, it's not enough, right? Let's just stipulate we need more, because the survivorship issues and the mortality burden are tremendous, as mentioned. But, that number has to account for the spend on basic science. That doesn't get lumped in, but that's where CAR T cells are going to come from. I think in DIPG, a disease you talked about, we need to understand that disease. That is a biologically complicated entity. And I think one of the really important advances was finding this interesting mutation that drives the cancer, and now that's brought a whole bunch of new biologists into that weren't working on it before. I frankly didn't know what DIPG was until about 5 years ago when it had that histone mutation. So that's what got me interested in it as a scientist. So getting more people in it and working on it is going to require the basic science, and it's going to be a new idea, I think. It's not something that we have ready to go, that we just have to do a clinical trial and give it to this patient. We're going to need a new approach for problems that are that complicated. So basic science is in some ways really an important part of the deal. So thank you. There are other questions.
Thank you so much for your talk. You talked quite a bit about the excitement of big data and using data sets to find new information about biology or treatment opportunities. So what can we as advocates do to forward that? And as everyone here in the room knows, maybe we're a unique group, maybe we're not. I think on the whole we're less sensitive to privacy concerns than some other patient groups. We understand the issue of consent for children, and we perceive it not to be an issue. We communicate that. I think we're pretty educated about our kids' treatments. So what do you see? What do you see patients or this community doing to forward that goal?
Thank you for the question. So I think probably the best way to start here is to talk about what the end result is that we want. I mean, I have a simple dream in mind. I don't think it's actually unrealizable, and I don't think it will take that long to get there if we all get behind it, which is just a big database of childhood cancer that has all the stuff I mentioned. Molecular sequencing of the cancer in detail that we'll pay for, or a private company will pay for, it doesn't matter. We'll take the data from either source. It has pathology, so the pathology report, but actually the images will capture the scanned immunohistochemistry and the H&Es of the patient's tumor. It'll have the radiology, it'll have the CAT scans that they get every week. It'll have pulmonary function tests, it'll have the doctor's notes. Most of the data you actually need to tell if someone's doing well in cancer, if they're not on a clinical trial, is embedded in this so-called free text. It's trapped in the free text of the doctor's notes. So somebody's got to abstract that EHR, and if you're talking about electronic health record, I apologize, if you're talking about thousands of electronic health records, you need machine learning. Humans can't do that efficiently. So we need some machine learning tricks that will help us get all the data. And then we want all this data together and linked and interoperable. And because some cancers are really rare, pediatric cancers are really rare, we have to have all the data. We can't have 80% of it or half of it. We'll be missing, if you're trying to figure things out and you only have 100 patients, you need all 100. You can't lose 50 just for ascertainment reasons, right? So that's where I think we need to be. And by the way, I think we need this not just for childhood cancer, but we need this for all cancer. These same things I talked about, this limits of data, aggregation in childhood cancer also apply to adult cancer. We have the same problems. We're not learning from every patient. We're only learning from the patients on clinical trials. In adult oncology, only 5% of patients are on clinical trials. That's very inefficient. We're not going to make progress fast enough unless we aggregate data. So that's what I think I want. That's the thing I want to have. And I will say, ideally, we try this first in childhood cancer. The reason for that is, as you mentioned, it's about 14,000 cases a year. It's a manageable number. Lung cancer would be hundreds of thousands of patients. That's probably too much for us to take on right away. Childhood cancer is the right size. It's composed of many rare and different entities, so the heterogeneity is a problem for clinical trials, but for a big data initiative, it's actually appealing. You want disparate kinds of data sets. And then I think this community is fired up and ready to go. I mean, this community won't let privacy concerns stand in the way, which are legitimate and important, but they can't be a fig leaf by which we hide behind as a way to not share data. And so I think that that makes childhood cancer a really a good, appealing opportunity here. And I think the STAR Act, I think helps. It already, as I said, provides a bit of a talking point for the NCI director, or maybe even a cudgel that I can say, look, Congress says we're doing this, so we're doing this. So let's all join hands, jump in together. So we can head that way, but it's still, we have more work to do. Some of the issues around this are weedy and involve cloud computing and something called data ontology. I didn't know what that was until recently. I mean, so there's some difficult issues we have to settle, but they are all, for the most part, known unknowns. They're engineering problems. They're things we know we need to fix, but we know we can fix them with time and money and committed researchers, and we'll get that. So what can you guys do? Well, I think you can first off buy into the notion, tell people this is what you want. That includes people who sit on IRBs. So sometimes the institutional review boards that review some of our studies, they hear about these kinds of data aggregation efforts, and they say, ooh, that has some privacy concerns. That concerns me. And a child, they're so vulnerable. That's a vulnerable population. We ought to treat them even more, in greater secrecy. And that effort to do good, it's laudable. That is a well-intended notion, but it actually hurts the patients. Because by not having the data linked to the larger data set, it makes it difficult to use. I mean, a little thing, if you're a basic scientist working on active, if you can get data with just by clicking on the internet buttons versus data where you have to give your email address, that difference matters, right? So if you want the data to be usable by the broad scientific community, by people not just in the United States, by researchers in Europe and China and Japan and whatnot, you have to make it as accessible and easy as possible while still protecting data privacy. So first off, buy into the vision, talk to the IRBs that don't think this is necessarily a good idea. And I think we then have to really be in a not curmudgeonly way, but in a useful way, talking to the various institutions that treat cancer in the United States for kids. We have to get them to all buy into this shared vision, and they all have to admit that no institution in the United States has enough patients by itself. We need to aggregate all the patients in the United States, and probably even in some instances globally. So we need a way to receive data from other countries. And when we have that, I think without ever doing a new clinical trial, we'll see that some of these 1% events respond to therapy much better than the 99%, and now we'll know how information how to treat that cancer. So it requires firm, persistent commitment, but I think we can get there.
Hi, so my name is Sam Abdelmas. I'm with Gavin's Galaxy in Houston, Texas. My question concerns big data. So I've served in healthcare and IT for 12 years. I've been a privacy officer. Why not make privacy a no issue? So scrub the patient's data. Any reputable EHR has a very defined section, and it's very easy to scrub the data and just send the useful data. Even globally, that's a standard that's used. Why not make the privacy a no issue and just scrub the data and put it in a big database?
That would be good if we had de-identified data for everybody. That would be progress from where we are now. But I don't think that would be good enough. And so for example, in the NCI, we have a data set called SEER. So what he's speaking about, he said this gets weedy fast, but we're talking about the ability to remove all identifying marks from the data, and then you can put it in a big aggregated data set, and that's safe. There's no risk of de-identification. No one can figure out it's your kid who had cancer in Houston versus somebody else's kid, and that's what we want from a data privacy point of view. And who would be against that? So de-identified data sets we can do today. We need to do more of that, and I agree wholeheartedly. But the problem is, I don't think that goes far enough, and let me explain why. So I have at the NCI a bunch of data sets like that that are de-identified aggregated data sets, and then I have one data set called SEER, the Surveillance Endpoint Epidemiology Research Cohort, that was mandated by the National Cancer Act in the 1970s. And what SEER did is it forced or commanded that the NCI would have a national database of cancer, and SEER is now maintained through a joint effort between the NCI and the CDC. And by the way, I think it's very unfortunate our CDC colleagues couldn't be here today, because I would have loved to explain how the federal agencies work together, and we have a great relationship with them. But I digress. But so SEER, because it was mandated by Congress, and because it's back from the 1970s, was specifically HIPAA exempt. It allowed us to collect identifying data on all those cases. So we not only have the demographics, the age and the sex, and the fact that they died of cancer, but if they're a Medicare patient, we can link that demographic data and the pathology data to their claims data, their insurance data, because we have the identifying information. We know their social security number, we know the patient's name, we can do that. And that identified linked data is just, so we have SEER that's unlinked, and we have SEER that's linked, SEER Medicare, and the linked data is much more useful. Ask any health services researcher in the country, what do you use the SEER data for, the registry data for, versus what you can do with SEER Medicare, and it's not doubling, not twice as useful or 10 times as useful, it's like 100 times more useful. And so if we want to get the kinds of data sets that I think we need to have, you have to be able to track the patient down and get new information every year. Were they cured? Did they stay cured? Did they eventually recur? Did their treatment respond or not respond? And that longitudinal assessment requires identification in those parts. So while I think de-identification can go a long way and is a great place to start, it's not enough. Sure.
Yeah. So
First applause for data identification. I love it. Yeah, maybe the last question. Two questions. Two quick ones, okay? Yeah. We'll go this one and that one.
yeah, so my question is, I appreciate the comments on survivorship and the emphasis you placed on that. I was wondering if you could comment on the current position for permanent director of the Office of Cancer Survivorship and what your plans are with respect to childhood cancer survivors going forward.
So, as many of you know, the NCI has been looking for a permanent director in the area of survivorship to be a DCCPS. That search has been going on for a while. We don't have a person yet. We have Deb Mayer, who is an old friend of mine, a great RN survivorship researcher from the University of North Carolina at the School of Public Health there, working on our behalf, and she's in fact one of the people leading the charge on the new STAR Act required survivorship RFA. But we're not giving up, right? We're going to keep this position open. It is something I feel like the NCI really needs. It is unimaginable that any good candidate for that job would not have tremendous experience in childhood cancer, given, as I already alluded, there's survivorship in adult oncology, there's survivorship in pediatric oncology. It's just a bigger deal for people who are going to survive their cancer for decades later on. So I am fully committed to finding a great person for that, and getting people to enter federal service is hard, but it's worth it when you do it. So we'll find somebody great. In the back. Okay, thank you for the comment again. the 4% problem. It is, as I said, it is true that no matter how much we spend, it's going to be not enough. It's true that if you account for the basic science spend, it's never clear how to count that in the 4%. But most importantly, I don't think it's 4% anymore. I think the numbers have already been going up. I think it will continue to do so, and then the absolute increase will do so. As Congress supports us with more funding. So let me promise to do this. How about we come back in a year or two and we'll talk about what we're getting for the spend, and I think we'll see progress. I think there's just no way I can answer that question, because no matter what it is, it's not enough, other than providing some results, right? I mean, we have to see what's going to happen with the moonshot funding and with other initiatives that we're working on, and I predict and hope that we will develop some things over the next few years that show a real commitment of the NCI to childhood cancer that will be sufficient for this audience. So thank you.
Thank our NCI director, Dr. Shea. It's great to see someone who has been in the field with patients. You obviously have a great subject matter expertise on the issue. And thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I will say the STAR Act also requires a pediatric oncologist to be on the NCI board. And we're hopeful it will move that 4% number. By having, for the first time, a childhood cancer doctor on that board. And so we look forward to working with you. And we have great, I think, breakthroughs in the future, and it's very, very exciting. I have some good news. I just got word from the Senate there's going to be a conference report coming over to the House fully funding the STAR Act. Not one any better. It was not by design, it was by accident, it just happened. And but I want to thank everyone in the room for making that happen, for getting that bill passed that will make such a difference in the lives of our children. And now it's going to be fully funded by Congress, and it's great news for everyone. And I'd like for all the children and survivors maybe to come up to the front of the room. Maybe we can take a picture together, and then we're going to have a lunch, I think.
Yeah, right here.
It's right here as well. So for all the children.